Here we are on lesson 7. We've seen a lot of different sensors up until now. We've used the PIR sensor, we've used an earth moisture soil sensor, and now we're going to use the ENV sensor. What does the ENV sensor do exactly? Well, it's 3 sensors in one. You may notice that it has a red port on it, so we won't be using port B this time. We'll be connecting it into port A. Generally, port A has more complicated sensors rather than just a simple on or off signal. The ENV sensor can sense temperature, moisture, and air pressure. So what better use from it than to use it as a weather station? We're going to be programming the ENV sensor to display its readout onto the M5Stack screen and also get it to control some images on the screen. Let's connect it up first. Here we are with the ENV sensor connected. Let's test out the temperature and moisture by holding it over this steaming cup of hot water and see if the values change on the screen. In order to create this weather station module, we're going to be using some more advanced graphic elements to create these graphics on the screen. We'll also be using variables and random numbers to generate some animations and be able to control those animations based on the readout from this sensor. So let's get started with it. Here we are once again in UiFlow. As we're making a weather station here, I'm going to rename my project to Weather Station. Now this particular lesson combines a whole bunch of the elements that we've learned so far. We're going to be getting readings from a sensor, we're going to be controlling animations and using if conditions to switch animations. And there's quite a lot of concepts to cover in this lesson, including some new concepts. So we're just going to take it bit by bit, test our code each step of the way to make sure every bit is working, and then proceed. So first, what I want to do is create our graphical elements. Basically, we're going to have a rainy day scene for if the humidity is high, and then we'll have a sunny day scene if we have any other conditions, particularly if the weather is warm. Okay? So first we're going to start off here by making a nice little image of a cloud. Just sort of dragging circles in, double tapping them to duplicate, maybe altering their radius for a bit of variation, making big and small circles, combining them together. Until we have something that looks like a cloud. Might need to move them around a bit. And that's starting to look more or less like what we want. And then over here in the upper left corner, I'm going to make something that will signify the sun. And even if the sun is not going to be on the screen, this element will be here, and then we can color it a different color depending on the weather. If it's sunny, we'll change it to a nice warm reddish orange color. If it's raining, then we'll just change it to black so it fades into the screen. Okay, so I'm just going to leave its color blank for now. I can always change that later. What I'm going to use now is going to add these rectangles. I'm just going to need these to be a small square, just a 1 pixel width and 2 pixel height. Basically what we're going to be doing with these is setting them at various lengths to simulate some rain falling down. So I can drag these along. Again, double tapping to duplicate so we've got a bunch of them. Some of them might get hidden behind the cloud, so we might just need to arrange things around a bit. And again, I can set the colors for this later on. There we go, rectangle 2. Okay, then we'll start to place these rectangles under the cloud. Okay, that's looking good for the raindrops for now. As I said, I'm going to change their colors later. Lastly, what we'll need is some labels to display the values coming from our sensor. Now, as we mentioned, the ENV sensor can show the temperature, pressure, and humidity. So I'm going to need 3 separate labels as placeholders. And these are going to be static. They're just going to be denoting which value is where. So for temperature, I'm just going to set this to T. And then set the second one to P for pressure. And finally, set one as H for humidity. So these are our placeholder for showing which value means what. And then we'll need an extra 3 text labels to directly show the value of the sensors. Okay, so graphically we've got most things set up already. I'd also like to use the RGB bar in this lesson combined with the graphical elements. But first I'm going to set up a loop of our first animation. So first I'm going to set this circle over here to go black once we have the rainy day animation. So I'll grab this over here, pop that in there. Let's see what circle. This is circle 6. So I'll set that circle 6. And again, let me set the border color also to be black. Okay, so that will make the sun fully disappear from our screen. And now what I want to do is add a kind of blue cool color in there to match the ambience of our rain. Okay, and then I'm going to set these rectangles colors to be a nice blue as well. So we have rectangle 1, rectangle 3, rectangle 2, and rectangle 4. Okay, 1 through 4. So we'll duplicate 4 of these for each of the rectangles that we have. And then I'll set their colors to a lighter blue. Okay, and then we'll set each of them to the corresponding rectangle. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use maths to randomly change the height of the rectangles. Okay, so we're going to be using a random block that we've not used before. If we go into maths, then we can drag this block here, random integer from something to something. Okay, so an integer is basically just a whole number. We have, on the opposite hand, we would have a float, which is a floating point number. But for this, we're just going to use random integer. And I'm going to create a variable to hold this value, which I can also call random. Okay, and I'm going to set that to a random value between, okay, the length I have already is, the height I have already is 2. So here, if we go into maths, my first number will be 2. and then I think a reasonable length for them to be at the maximum length would be 50. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is set each of these rectangles to randomly change their height between this range. So I'll go back into this here, select the height block, and then duplicate one for each of the rectangles. Set them to each of the corresponding shapes. And then here I'm going to set their height to that variable that I've just created. Okay, now we can do a quick test of this. We see that now we're getting a nice sort of rain effect, but the color of the raindrops are still white, so I think we ought to change the border color rather than the fill color. Let's have a look at this. And what's also happening is they are all randomly changing height at the same time. We want it to be a bit more randomized, so we'll need to duplicate this block and put it in between each of the rectangles. Okay, as I was saying, we'll pop this random block in between each of them to make sure they're offset from each other, and then we'll test that again. Now that's looking more what I was looking for. Okay, so that animation is pretty much done for now. We might need to tweak it a little later, but I'm just going to put this off to one side. Okay, now let's have a look at our sun animation. Okay, so first what I'm going to want to do is blank out these rectangles. So I'll then set the rectangle border color for all of these rectangles to black. Okay, duplicate 4 of them for each of those rectangles. Okay, so when this second loop starts, basically those rectangles will disappear. Okay, now I want this to be set to a nice warm color for our sun. So I'm going to set here the color of this, and I'll probably have to set the border color as well. Okay, then double check. Okay, it's circle 6, so I'll change that to circle 6. Okay, and now I'm also going to change the RGB bar color as well to a nice warm color. Okay, now we're going to basically create a kind of halo effect around our sun. Now, in these UI blocks, we don't have a block for manipulating the border radius. We can only manipulate the size of the circle. However, we have some extra graphic elements down here. You may have explored some of these on your own time. Perhaps you've drawn some lines or some triangles on the screen. We're going to be using this LCD circle. Okay, and I'll make sure that it's at the same coordinates as my sun circle. So x43 and y40, and let me double check the radius. That's 20, and I'll change it to the same color. Okay, So now what we're going to be doing with the radius of this circle is gradually making it get bigger and then disappear and start emanating from the same place again. So to do this, I'm going to be using a different kind of loop. If we're going to loops, I'm going to use this count with loop. We've not used this before, and essentially what it will do is for a certain range, it will increment the value by a certain value that we choose. So basically what I want to do is make the circle grow by 1 pixel each time. So I'm going to pop this in here, and then I'm going to start with the original radius of my circle, which is 20. Let's go into maths. And then I'll gradually grow it to 30. Okay, and I don't want that to happen all at once. I want it to go up in steps of 1. So I'll add that at the end. Okay, so now if I pop this in here, we'll set the circle original radius, but instead of having it staying at 20, we're going to use this variable here, which is going to gradually grow from 20 to 30. So if I look in variables, we'll see now that we've created this count from loop, we have this I variable, which we can set in the radius field. Okay, and then what I want to happen once it grows to its full size is for it to shrink back down and make it disappear. So I'll set that to black, and then I'm going to use the minus block here to -1 from the value on each count of the loop. Okay, and then we want to see the result of this gradually. So remember, we'll need to add in a delay. So I'm going to add in a fairly small delay. Let's think maybe about 0.05 should do it. And then again, I want to reset this color of this radius and the original radius size to black, so that once the loop ends, it sort of refreshes. Okay, let's have a quick test of that now. That's pretty much what I was looking for. Okay, so now we've got both of our animations. We want to trigger them off the sensor value. So with all of our sensors, we've noticed that we need to add them in the units panel first. So we're using the ENV sensor for this lesson. Let's tick it, make sure it's assigned to port A, as it's a red sensor. Okay. And then these labels that I have here, labels 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to drag in a label block for each of them. And for these labels, I'm going to set it to read out the temperature from the sensor. So I'll go into units, get the temperature value, pop it into the first place. And then for the fifth one, I want to get the air pressure value. Pop that in there. And then finally, we'll add the humidity value. Okay, so this is going to read those values out on the screen. And maybe we want a delay for the refresh of the value, which I can pop in there as well. We only want a short delay here, so I can just use 0.1 seconds. Okay, now as we've learned previously, if we want things to happen based on some condition, we're going to need some logic blocks. I'm going to use this if do else block. And the condition will be if my humidity value is above a certain threshold, then set it to play one of the animations. If not, then set it to play the other animation. So I'll use a comparator block here. If my sensor value is more than or equal to, so if my humidity is more than, let's say 50, remember we can always tweak these values later if we find that they need a little bit of changing. So if that's the case, that my humidity is above 50, I want to play this rain animation. So I'll pop that in there. We're starting to get a little bit crowded now, so I'm just going to zoom out. Maybe zoom back in again a little. Okay. And make sure I can still grab my second animation. Okay, so if its humidity is above or equal to 50, then play this animation. Otherwise, else, we will play this animation instead. Okay, now let's give it a test. Let's see if our values and our animations run. And here we have our complete weather station. We can place it near a window or somewhere sheltered outside. We could even change the code to make sure it creates a log of the temperature based on the time of day or over time. We could also use it for other things. Let's think of where we could use a temperature sensor or a moisture sensor. Perhaps we could use it in the kitchen to warn us if we left the stove on. Get your brain thinking of solutions that we could use this with. And then I'd like to hear your suggestions. Make sure you leave your suggestions in the comment. If you get stuck, don't forget to ask for help, and I'll see you in the next lesson.